You're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's daily rewatch of Star Trek, where we look at all 729 episodes from beginning to end. I'm Mike.
Hi, I'm Melissa.
And today we're going to talk about an episode and a movie. We're going to be talking about the Deep Space Nine episode, Defiant, and the first Next Generation movie, Generations. So, let's get started with Defiant. Now, this is the episode where Riker comes aboard the station and starts flirting it up with Kira, and he's like, "Let me see that new ship, the Defiant." And she's like, "Okay." And then he kidnaps her and steals the ship, and it turns out that it's actually Thomas Riker. What? Hijinks ensue. So, what do you think about Defiant?
It was a great episode. I enjoyed it. There were some parts that were weird. Like, it was weird that O'Brien didn't quite get who he was, but I guess they kind of hinted at that maybe, or they kind of did that to kind of throw us off, his personality, with him being angry at O'Brien, Riker. Yeah. I like the personality of Thomas, kind of see the differences of how he, and it makes sense, and how he's kind of trying to get out of the shadows of Riker. I do like the way that they are revisiting and they're connecting all the series together. And they also do a good job with connecting the series by bringing in the Marquis.
Yeah.
So I think that was great, because then we see that in like Next Generation, we're seeing it now, and then we see it in Voyager. So I think that's one of the things that Star Trek does great, is that, I mean, you do have some reoccurring characters or aliens or species. In this one, like a subgroup, the Marquis, that they introduce, and then they just keep playing on these characters, giving you an understanding of them.
Yeah, you know, I think that the stuff that they did with the Maquis was really interesting, because, I mean, it's sort of like the the thing which happens, you know, on occasion, you know, where it's like the Maquis was clearly a adversary which was set up in first Next Generation and then expanded upon in Deep Space Nine, with the intent being that they were going to play a major role in Voyager. So it was sort of like reverse engineered, you know, to be in Next Gen and Deep Space Nine. But then, you know, in Voyager, even though it was part of the whole premise, they basically dropped it right away. And in Deep Space Nine, I think, given the nature of the show, they were able to explore the nature of the Maquis to a much more effective degree, and I think that this is a key case of that. And I think it is really cool how they brought back Thomas Riker from the Next Generation, because I love that episode of Next Generation, as I'm sure a lot of people do, and I love Defiant, and it's great, you know, as sort of like an examination of what happens when, you know, someone, you know, has different life experiences and ends up on a different path. You know, if he literally is the same exact person as Commander Riker, and yet because he was, you know, trapped on a planet, and God, I mean, you can't help but feel bad for this guy, you know, through no fault of his own. He gets stuck on an abandoned planet for like 7 years by himself, and then they finally find him, and he's so desperate to try to, you know, become his own person that he ends up in a Cardassian jail for, like, you know, probably the rest of his life. I mean, God, what a tragic character. Meanwhile, the other Riker is off doing his thing.
Probably on Risa.
Yeah, you know, it's really kind of sad, you know, but really, really effective. And I think it was a really good episode.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that you kind of brought up with that is that, you know, you feel bad for him, but I think Kira brings up that he's trying to be a hero instead of doing what needs to be done. So, I mean, he's trying to get out of these shadows, but he's not really thinking about the bigger picture, which is, how can he best help the Marquis? He's like, how can I best get out of Riker's shadows? So, I mean, and when you think about that, I kind of don't feel as bad for him because he's not thinking of the bigger scheme of things, which is what he should be focused on.
It's weird because, and Nana Visitor has talked about this, but, in this episode in particular, there's a lot of talk about, like, being a terrorist and what it means to be a terrorist and what you have to do and everything like that. And, they never shy away from the fact that Kira, was a terrorist, and she was, fighting for a cause which was worthy and everything like that, but she was using, certain techniques which, under some circumstances, from some perspectives, are definitely questionable. And, you think about that now in the light of present day, post 9/11, and it's like, what does that mean to be a terrorist? What does that say about that character, really? And Nana Visitor has, brought that up, on occasion and said, like, could you do that character now? How would that character be different if they were written now? And, it really does speak to kind of like what we were hearing about, yesterday at the convention here in Vegas, with John Billingsley talking about Enterprise and Star Trek in general always being a product of its time. And even though, as we've discussed and will discuss in the coming days, that Deep Space Nine, in a lot of ways, sort of predicted where the world was going to end up in, a short period of time, it would be interesting to see how some elements would have been portrayed if the show had been made even just 2 years later, literally just 2 years later, That's
a really interesting point because I never really kind of thought about the terrorist aspect of it. She was one, but it's kind of hard to see that because she was also fighting for her freedom.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's kind of hard to pick a side on that, especially after what we've gone through.
It really gets into the idea of perspective, But it's interesting. It's an interesting, sort of like philosophical quandary, I guess.
I thought it was interesting when they're looking for the ship and they're working, the Cardassians, and they're working with Sisko, and he gets to go to, I guess, the Cardassians' home base. I can't remember what it's called. And you have the lady from Obsidian Order come. I was kind of surprised that she was a female.
I don't think our Cardassians. I don't think the Cardassians are necessarily, sexist in the same way that
other species are, which makes it incredible because, well, I don't know if, like, before this, if they've shown it, but it was kind of neat when I saw her. I was like, she has more power than Gul Dukat, who, I mean, that's kind of what we've seen as power. Yeah. And then here she is, and you're like, no, you can't take the ships into there because I say so. Yeah. And he doesn't have any power against it. And here she is questioning his tactics, like, why didn't you have the foresight to see that? And she can do that, and he can't say anything. And I love that they built that strong character into it, where she's only an observer, but she actually does have more power than him. So it's kind of great that they build those strong characters.
I just need to bring up one more thing about this episode, which is my favorite thing, one of my favorite things in all of Star Trek. Okay, if we skip ahead 2 years, and it's literally almost exactly 2 years to First Contact, the second Next Generation movie. There's the scene at the beginning, spoilers, where Worf comes in with the Defiant and the big thing, and the Defiant gets damaged, and they beam Worf onto the Enterprise, and that's how they get Worf into the story. And you see the Defiant in action. It would be the first time that the Enterprise crew has seen the Defiant in action. And, Worf and Riker share a little moment where they're talking about the Defiant, and they're saying, like, oh, the Defiant will be okay, don't worry about it. And then Riker says to Worf, tough little ship. And then Worf says, little, and then, it's a funny little moment, and, it works in the context of the movie. Well, that movie was written by Ron Moore along with Brannon Braga. Ron Moore also wrote Defiant. And if you go back and you watch this episode, when Thomas Riker steals the Defiant and he's taking it away, he says, tough little ship.
Yeah, I remember that quote.
Which means that literally, and I mean, no one would pick up on this, except for like really hardcore fans. But he had that line of dialogue that Thomas Riker said 2 years ago, and then as a callback to that random episode with a different character, showing the parallels between there in a major motion picture up on the big screen, he has a different Riker say, "Tough little ship."
Were you that excited when you saw it on the big screen? Because you're pretty excited right now.
Oh, I didn't pick up on it then.
Okay.
Because, it's
But
a
now you're
random
really
episode.
excited.
But then, it was, because you remember that line because you see First Contact a lot more than you see Defiant. At least I do.
Yeah.
So you know that line, "Tough little ship." Little. It's a funny line. So then you're watching this episode and you see Riker and he's stealing Defiant and he's like, "Tough little ship." And I'm like, what? Oh my God. This is amazing. Okay.
I would love to know how many other people had the same moment after they saw Defiant.
I think a lot. Okay, here's
Let
the
us
thing.
know.
Here's the thing. Ron Moore is a genius. You are a huge fan of Outlander.
Oh, yes, of
Okay.
course. I agree that he's a genius.
I think that Battlestar Galactica may be the best television show ever made.
Okay, I agree that's good, too.
His work on Star Trek is, unparalleled.
I think you need a separate podcast for Rod Moore.
And yet, his greatest accomplishment as a writer is that line in First Contact calling back to this line in Defiant, in my humble opinion. Anyway, should we move on to our next thing?
Yes, let's talk about some more funny lines in the next.
Okay, all right. Star Trek Generations, which is the first Next Generation movie, also written by Ron Moore and Brannon Braga.
Oh my gosh, I know you're excited to see that at the convention because I can see how excited you are right now.
We're going to get to see them in a couple days. I guess from when this is dropping, we're going to get to see them tomorrow. Oh my God, I can't wait. Anyway, they wrote Star Trek Generations, directed by David Carson. This was the first Next Generation movie, came out mere months after All Good Things, the last episode of Next Generation. And this is the one where essentially, Kirk dies. There's the Nexus. Everyone knows what's going on in Generations. I don't think we really have to give a synopsis of this. But what do you think about Generations? Because I come at it from a very unique perspective, which I'm sure most people on the network have already heard. But what do you think about Generations?
It's fine. I'm not as big a fan of the movies as I am the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's fine to see. It had some good points in it. They touched a lot on data and that idea of emotion and kind of trying to be something you're not, or wanting more that it's not necessarily better. I thought that was interesting. The idea of kind of that age, dealing with that, I thought that was interesting with Kirk. I love the line when Scotty's like, "Captain, is there something wrong with your chair?" I know it's probably not everyone else's favorite, but I thought that was funny. So that's also good. So, they had some good dialogue in there, and it touched on a lot of stuff in the movie. It works, but, for me, I'm not as big a fan of the movies.
Okay. Yeah, I like the movies a whole bunch. The first two for the Next Generation movies. This movie in particular holds a very special place in my heart as a movie fan, because I was much more of a Star Trek fan before I was a movie fan. And as someone who came in, this was an amazing time to be a Star Trek fan, probably the most amazing time to be a Star Trek fan. You had Next Generation, which was, ending, and you had Voyager, which was starting up, and then a Next Generation big screen movie, and all of this happened in the span of 8 months, not to mention Deep Space Nine just consistently turning out the best Star Trek anyone had ever seen up until that point, and probably maybe still to this day, so it was an amazing time to be a Star Trek fan. And this was right when I was getting into Star Trek, and this was my first chance to see a Star Trek movie on the big screen, and that spectacle was kind of amazing. And it really sort of made me fall in love with the big screen. I mean, I remember going to see it, the sneak preview on Thursday night, and then I went to see it the very next day with all of my friends from the Sci-Fi Fantasy Club in high school.
Oh, gosh.
And then I, had my parents take me to see it in THX at Yorktown. And, this was sort of like ground zero for me becoming a movie fan, but more important than that, a fan of movie theaters. A fan of seeing, things on the big screen, a fan of the theatrical experience.
Okay, what was it that worked so well for you? What is it that you're loving?
It was the fact that I had been sitting there watching, hours and hours of Star Trek on my 19-inch TV, Sony Trinitron TV, off of, UPN Power 50 with, reception, which was so bad that you could barely see the image. Who knew what color data was? That was always anybody's guess. And now, all of a sudden, I'm seeing this on a massive screen with 5.1 Dolby Digital surround sound and everything like that. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just, it's an epic experience.
Okay, what aspects of the movie? What did you take away from the movie? What is it that you liked the most?
Okay, so actually going back to the movie itself?
Yes, let's go back to the movie we were talking about.
It's hard to separate myself from that experience because when I think about it, logically, I can definitely see the flaws. Do I think it's as bad as everyone else does? Absolutely not. I think it's a great movie. I really love seeing these characters interact with each other in ways that we haven't really seen before.
For example, like who?
Well, I mean, you've got, obviously the big one is seeing Kirk and Picard meet, and I really do love the stuff with Kirk at the beginning of the movie. I think that
Same
is
here.
kind of a fitting end to that character. Once he gets back in the Nexus and they're fighting on the bridge, I don't know how, not that bridge, but the bridge, like actual bridge. That doesn't,
the bridge. Okay.
that doesn't work for me so well. But I love seeing these things which are, everyone talks about now, like Star Trek belongs on the TV screen. I believe that to be true, but I also think that it's great to get these bursts of spectacle every couple of years, and this was my first burst of spectacle, and that's why I love it. I don't know.
How do you feel about them killing Kirk?
Whatever. This is a weird thing. This is a weird thing, okay? Everyone now is worried about spoilers and everything and blah, 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 and God forbid anything gets spoiled. And, JJ with Into Darkness keeping the fact that the villain is Khan a secret forever. No such thing existed back in 1994. No one cared. I knew every single plot point of this movie going into it. I knew that the Enterprise was going to get destroyed. I knew that Kirk was going to die. I knew all of that stuff before I set foot in the theater, and so did everyone else. It was like no one cared. It was like more about telling the story than it was about trying to surprise people. And I think that that's just interesting how, times have changed. But yeah, Kirk dying, it's fine. Do I think they did a good job with his actual death scene? Not really. I think actually his fake death was much more effective. But whatever. I think it's still a favorite for me, more because of what it means to me on a personal level than the movie itself. But I still do think it's a really good movie. Like everyone, including like Ron Moore and Brandon Braga, are like, yeah, we spent like a year writing that and like 2 weeks writing All Good Things, and then All Good Things ends up being the much better movie, and we wish we would have done that as the actual theatrical movie. And everyone thinks that All Good Things is, way better than Generations. I'm way, way, way in the minority on this, but I actually prefer Generations to All Good Things. So yeah, I definitely think it's great, for sure. Yeah. All right, well, we've been talking for a long time, so we should probably wrap this up. Anywhere people can find you? No. All right, you're off the grid. As for me, you can find me right here on Trek FM doing Stage 9, and you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. So thanks for joining us today, and tomorrow we'll be back with 2 more episodes of Deep Space Nine, Fascination, and Past Tense Part 1.